Oh, hi kids. I'm the Apostle Paul, and I'm so proud of the gospel. I can't wait to tell more people about it. Oh, what's that? What does the gospel mean? Well, gospel just means great news about Jesus. The gospel is so important. So I'm on my way to Spain to tell more people about this great news about Jesus. Oh, but I need some help from my friends in Rome. So I wrote this letter to my friends in Rome about how awesome the gospel is so that they will help me in my mission to spread it in Spain. Hey, have you been reading my letter to the Romans? You have? You read the first 4 chapters in Planet Faith? Well, that's great. Oh, but you forgot what it's all about? Well, don't worry. I'm going to summarize very quickly. Listen up. Your teachers might ask you some questions later. The first 4 chapters of Romans tells us 3 very important things. First thing, the bad news. No one is right with God. Everyone is under God's anger. You see, God is good, and He made everything good. And because God is God and He made everything, God knows what the right way to live is. But the problem is, we don't want to live God's right way. We're unrighteous. It means we don't do what is right in God's eyes. Here's what I wrote. No one is right with God. No one at all. This is very bad news because no one is righteous. God is rightly angry with all of us. That's why I wrote in Romans 1, God shows His anger in heaven. It is against all the godless and evil things people do. They are so evil that they say no to the truth. Here's the second thing that I said in the first 4 chapters of Romans. Here's the worst news. You cannot be right with God by obeying God's law by yourself. You see, some people think, I know the Bible. If I try my best to obey God's law in the Bible, then I will be right with God. But God is perfect. And to be right with God, we need to be perfect too. We need to score 100 marks out of 100 for righteousness. And here's the big problem. Nobody can obey God perfectly. So just because you know what God says in the Bible, it doesn't mean that you can do it. Here's what I wrote in Romans chapter 2. If you judge someone else, you have no excuse for it. When you judge another person, you're judging yourself. You do the same things you blame others for doing. We know that when God judges those who do evil things, He judges fairly. All of us do wrong things. None of us can meet God's perfect standards. All of you know it's wrong to lie. But do you lie too? All of you know it's wrong to disobey your parents. But don't you do that too? You see, here's the worst news. Nobody can be right with God by obeying God's law. We can't do it, and we don't want to do it. Here's the third and most important thing you need to know from Romans. Here's the great news. There's only one way to be right with God. Put your faith in Jesus. Here's what I wrote in Romans chapter 3. But now, God has shown us His saving power without the help of God's law. The law and the prophets tell us this. We are made right with God by putting our faith in Jesus Christ. This happens to all who believe. Jesus is the most amazing person ever. Jesus is the only person who obeyed God's law perfectly. Jesus is the only person that is right with God. He does everything that is right in God's eyes. You see, when you put your faith in Jesus, when you trust Jesus, something amazing happens. Jesus' righteousness goes to you, even though you're unrighteous. Jesus gives you His full marks for righteousness. But here's the better news. But Jesus doesn't just give you full marks for righteousness. He also takes away God's anger for your unrighteousness. Here's what I wrote in Romans chapter 3. God put forward Jesus as a propitiation by His blood to be received by faith. See, propitiation means to turn away God's anger. So, when you put your faith in Jesus, Jesus takes away God's anger for you on the cross. That's why the cross is so important for followers of Jesus. Everyone, if you trust Jesus to give you his full marks for righteousness and take away God's anger for your sin, you are right with God. You're no longer God's enemy. You're God's family. You can come to God like a child comes to a loving father. So, I hope that you will put your faith in Jesus, trust Jesus to give you his full marks for righteousness, trust Jesus to take God's anger for your unrighteousness. Can you see why I'm not ashamed and so proud of this good news? Jesus is the only person who can make us right with God. Jesus solves our biggest problem, God's anger at our sin and unrighteousness. Look, this is what I said at the beginning of my letter. These two verses summarize my whole letter to the Romans. I'm not ashamed of the good news. It's God's power to save everyone who believes. It's meant first for the Jews, but it's also meant for the Gentiles. The good news shows God's power to make people right with himself. Friends, the gospel is good news about how God saves everyone from his anger. It's good news for everyone, whether you're Jew or Gentile, Singaporean or not, Chinese, Malay, Indian, Korean, English, Australian. Everyone needs to hear this good news. Everyone needs Jesus to be made right with God. So in the first 4 chapters of Romans, I answered the question, how can unrighteous people like you and me be right with God? Well, here's the answer. Put your faith in Jesus to give you his full marks for righteousness and take away God's anger for your unrighteousness on the cross. But there's still a lot of questions I haven't answered. How do I know that God really loves me and he'll keep his promise to bring me to heaven? If Jesus died for my sin, does it mean I can keep on sinning? Well, now I'm not God's enemy. I'm God's family. But what does it mean to live as a child of God? We'll find out in the next few weeks in Romans chapter 5 to 8. See ya, kids. Be proud of the gospel. It's great news for everyone. Here's some questions from your teachers.